Ethan jolted awake to the sound of metal tearing through the sky. The stillness of the night was shattered by a deafening crash, its reverberations shaking the walls of his small cabin. He bolted upright, adrenaline surging, and fumbled for the flashlight by his bed. Outside, the forest was eerily quiet, the usual chorus of nocturnal creatures replaced by an unsettling silence. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness as he stumbled out of the cabin, his breath misting in the cool night air. The smell of burning metal was thick, acrid, and it led him like a beacon through the trees. As he pushed through the underbrush, his mind raced. What could have fallen from the sky with such force? His first thought was a plane, but the forest was far too remote for a flight path. He broke through the treeline into a small clearing, and his breath caught in his throat. In the center of the clearing, half buried in the earth, was a sleek, alien craft. Its surface was a strange, iridescent metal, unlike anything he'd ever seen, with symbols etched into it that glowed faintly in the dark. Smoke billowed from its underside, and small fires licked at the surrounding foliage. Ethan's heart pounded as he approached the ship, his footsteps hesitant. This was no ordinary crash. This was something extraordinary, something otherworldly. As he neared, a low groan reached his ears, and he realized with a jolt that someone, or something, was inside. He circled the craft, searching for an entry point. A hatch, slightly ajar, caught his eye, and he pried it open with trembling hands. The interior was dark, filled with a strange, pulsating light that seemed to come from the very walls. He stepped inside, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, and the faint hum of alien technology filled his ears. His flashlight beam fell on a figure slumped against the far wall, a humanoid, but unmistakably alien. The creature's skin was a pale blue, its eyes closed, and its chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. Ethan's breath quickened. This was no ordinary encounter. He was looking at a being from another world. For a moment, he was paralyzed by fear and awe. But then the mechanic in him took over. The creature was injured, possibly dying. Whatever this being was, it needed help. Ethan knelt beside the alien, his hands shaking as he examined its wounds. A deep gash ran along its side, oozing a thick, dark fluid that smelled faintly of sulfur. He didn't know if it was blood, but it was clear the alien was in bad shape. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small toolkit, a habit from years of fixing things on the fly. He had no idea if his tools would be of any use, but he had to try. As he worked, he murmured to the alien, half to reassure himself and half in the hope that it might understand. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm going to do what I can to help." The alien stirred, its eyes fluttering open. They were large, dark, and filled with pain. For a moment, their gazes locked, and Ethan felt a strange connection, as if the creature could see into his very soul. The alien spoke, its voice a raspy whisper, the words halting and unfamiliar. "Help, ship." Ethan nodded, not fully understanding but driven by an instinct to aid this strange being. He turned his attention to the ship's control panel, trying to make sense of the alien symbols. His fingers hovered over the controls, and he hesitated, feeling the weight of the decision before him. Whatever he did next could mean life or death, for both of them. The hum of the ship grew louder, more urgent, as if it were on the brink of something catastrophic. Ethan's heart raced, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He didn't have time to question the implications of his actions, he had to act. Taking a deep breath, he made his choice, pressing a series of buttons that seemed to correspond with the ship's critical systems. The ship shuddered, and for a terrifying moment, Ethan thought he'd made a fatal mistake. But then the lights stabilized, and the hum of the engines became a steady thrum. The alien relaxed slightly, its breathing less labored, and Ethan felt a flicker of hope. As he stepped back, he realized the full gravity of the situation. He had just helped save an alien life. And in doing so, he might have just changed his own destiny forever. The sound of distant sirens broke through his thoughts, and Ethan knew that others would soon arrive. But this was just the beginning of what he couldn't yet imagine. Ethan's hands trembled as he stepped out of the alien ship, the weight of what he had just done pressing down on him. The night was still, but the distant wail of sirens grew louder, cutting through the tension like a blade. He knew he had little time before the authorities arrived, and the implications of their arrival made his stomach churn. What would they do to the alien? What would they do to him? The alien, still weak but more alert, staggered out of the hatch and leaned heavily on the side of the ship. Its dark eyes scanned the treeline, taking in the surroundings with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Ethan couldn't help but marvel at the creature standing before him, a being from another world, right here in his secluded forest. He swallowed hard, pushing down the surge of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "We need to get out of here," Ethan said, his voice tight with urgency. "The authorities, humans, are coming, and they won't understand. They'll see you as a threat." The alien nodded, as if it comprehended more than just the words, and pointed to a compartment on the side of the ship. Ethan hurried over, prying it open to reveal a small device, sleek and metallic, with symbols glowing faintly on its surface. The alien pressed a hand to the device, and Ethan watched as the symbols rearranged themselves, the device emitting a soft hum in response. "What is that?" Ethan asked, his curiosity piqued, but the alien only gave a faint, almost imperceptible shake of its head. There was no time for explanations. The sirens were closer now, the flashing lights piercing through the gaps in the trees. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He had to think fast. "We need to hide," he said, glancing around the clearing. The ship was too large to move or conceal, but they couldn't just stay out in the open. "This way," he motioned, leading the alien into the dense foliage. They moved quickly, Ethan pushing through the underbrush while the alien followed close behind, its breathing labored but determined. The forest seemed to close in around them, the branches and leaves creating a natural barrier between them and the world outside. But the fear gnawing at Ethan's insides wouldn't let up. He knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. Finally, they reached a small cave, half hidden by a thick curtain of ivy. Ethan pulled the vines aside, ushering the alien inside. The cave was dark and damp, the air heavy with the smell of earth, but it was secluded, a place where they could catch their breath and regroup. As they settled inside, Ethan tried to steady his nerves. His mind raced with questions, but he knew he had to focus on the immediate threat. "They'll search the area," he whispered, more to himself than to the alien. "We have to stay quiet, stay out of sight." The alien, still clutching the mysterious device, glanced at Ethan, then at the cave's entrance. It seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, its expression, if he could call it that, reflecting a mixture of resolve and unease. It was then that Ethan realized something fundamental had shifted. He was no longer just a mechanic in a remote cabin. He was now a part of something much larger, something that would change his life irrevocably. Minutes felt like hours as they waited in the darkness, the sound of distant voices and footsteps growing nearer, then fading away. Ethan held his breath, every muscle tense, until the forest returned to its usual stillness. The danger had passed, for now. Ethan finally exhaled, his body relaxing just a fraction. "I don't know what you are," he murmured, turning to the alien, "but I'm not going to let them take you." The alien studied him for a moment, then spoke in a voice that was clearer, though still strained. "Thank you?" "Ethan." The words, though foreign in accent, were unmistakable in their sincerity. Ethan blinked in surprise. You know my name?" The alien nodded slowly. "Learned from ship's systems." Ethan's mind reeled at the implications, but before he could respond, the alien raised the device, its lights blinking in a rapid sequence. "Help me fix ship," it said, the urgency in its tone cutting through Ethan's swirling thoughts. "Then leave." Ethan hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Fixing the ship meant aligning himself with this alien, with whatever mission or purpose it had. It meant stepping into a world of unknowns, of dangers he couldn't even begin to fathom. But as he looked into the alien's eyes, he saw something that made the decision for him: trust, and maybe even a hint of desperation. He nodded. "Let's do it." The alien's expression softened, and for the first time since the crash, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. This was only the beginning of their journey, and whatever came next, they would face it together. Ethan's heart pounded as he and the alien crouched behind a thick wall of ferns, their eyes fixed on the flashing lights that pierced the night. The authorities had set up a perimeter around the crash site, their movements methodical and precise. The tension in the air was palpable, and Ethan knew they were running out of time. He couldn't afford to hesitate now, not with everything at stake. "We need a plan," Ethan whispered, glancing at the alien beside him. The creature's gaze was steady, its dark eyes reflecting the distant lights. Ethan could sense the resolve in the alien's posture, a determination that matched his own. "If we can't repair the ship tonight, we'll have to find another way to keep you hidden." The alien nodded, its expression unreadable but focused. It held up the device it had taken from the ship earlier, the symbols on it glowing faintly in the darkness. "This key to repairs," it said in a voice that was still halting but more confident than before. "But needs power." Ethan frowned, his mind racing through the possibilities. The alien ship was a marvel of advanced technology, but without power, they were stranded, vulnerable. "Power, like from the grid? The local power lines?" Ethan asked, thinking aloud. It was risky, but if they could siphon off some electricity, they might be able to get the ship operational enough for a quick escape. The alien considered this, then gave a slow nod. "Yes. Enough to start sequence." "Okay," Ethan said, taking a deep breath. "There's an old power station about a mile from here. It's been abandoned for years, but it should still be connected to the grid." He looked at the alien, trying to gauge its reaction. "We'll need to get there without being seen." The alien's gaze shifted toward the direction of the station, then back to Ethan. "Lead. I follow." They moved quickly, staying low as they navigated the dense underbrush. The forest seemed to close in around them, the shadows deepening as they distanced themselves from the crash site. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, set Ethan's nerves on edge, but he forced himself to stay focused. There was no room for error. The old power station loomed ahead, a hulking silhouette against the night sky. Its rusted structure was a relic of another era, long forgotten by most. As they approached, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. There were no signs of life, but the eerie stillness of the place made his skin crawl. "This way," Ethan murmured, leading the alien toward the back of the station where the main power lines were still intact. He could feel the hum of electricity in the air, a low thrumming that reverberated through the ground. "If we can tap into this, we might just have a chance." The alien nodded, moving with a quiet efficiency that impressed Ethan. It knelt beside the power lines, attaching the device to the cables with a series of quick, practiced motions. As the symbols on the device began to glow more brightly, Ethan felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. But before Ethan could dwell on the thought, a sudden noise shattered the silence, a distant shout, followed by the unmistakable crackle of a radio. His heart skipped a beat. They'd been found. "Go!" Ethan urged, his voice tight with urgency. "We have to finish this now." The alien's hands moved faster, its focus unwavering even as the tension mounted. The device hummed to life, emitting a soft, pulsating light that grew in intensity. Ethan could feel the air around them shift, charged with energy as the alien worked to transfer the power. But the voices were getting closer, and Ethan knew they had only seconds to spare. He scanned the surrounding area, his mind racing. They needed an escape route, something, anything to buy them more time. Finally, the alien looked up, its eyes locking with Ethan's. "Ready," it said, the word laced with determination. Ethan nodded, his mind made up. "Then let's move." They bolted from the power station, the alien leading the way as they sprinted back toward the ship. The trees blurred around them, the night air whipping past as they raced against time. Ethan's lungs burned, but he pushed through the pain, driven by a singular focus: survival. As they neared the clearing, the distant lights of the authorities' vehicles came back into view. But something was different. There was a commotion, a shift in the atmosphere that Ethan couldn't quite place. And then he saw it, the ship, its once damaged hull now glowing with a faint, otherworldly light. The repairs had worked, and the ship was coming back to life. But they weren't out of danger yet. "Inside, now!" Ethan shouted, urgency flooding his voice. They dove into the ship just as a beam of light swept across the clearing, narrowly missing them. The hatch sealed shut behind them, and Ethan felt the ship's systems roar to life, the deck vibrating beneath his feet. As the ship began to rise, Ethan caught one last glimpse of the forests below, the figures of the authorities growing smaller as they ascended. Relief washed over him, but it was tinged with the realization that their journey was far from over. "We made it," he breathed, turning to the alien. "But what now?" The alien met his gaze, its expression unreadable. "Now we fly." Ethan nodded, understanding the gravity of those words. This was only the beginning. The ship's ascent into the night sky was both exhilarating and terrifying. Ethan gripped the console, his knuckles white as he watched the earth shrink beneath them. The hum of the ship's engines filled the cabin, a low, constant vibration that thrummed through his bones. This was real. There was no turning back now. Beside him, the alien worked quickly, its slender fingers flying over the control panel. Symbols Ethan couldn't begin to understand flickered across the screens, casting an eerie glow in the cramped cockpit. The alien's expression remained unreadable, but there was a tension in its movements that Ethan couldn't ignore. Something was wrong. "What's happening?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with unease. The alien didn't look up. "They follow," it said, its tone clipped. "Enemy ships, closing in." Ethan's heart sank. He'd known their escape wouldn't be easy, but the reality of being pursued by alien forces was far more daunting than he'd anticipated. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his nerves. "Can we outrun them?" The alien hesitated, its dark eyes flicking toward Ethan. "Ship not fully repaired. Power limited." Panic clawed at Ethan's chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had to think. "What about weapons? Can we fight them off?" The alien shook its head. "Weapons offline. Power focused, on flight." Ethan's mind raced. They were sitting ducks in the sky, with no way to defend themselves. The only thing they had on their side was speed, and even that was limited. "Then we need a plan," he said, determination hardening his voice. "Is there anywhere we can hide? A place where they won't follow?" The alien's gaze turned distant as it considered the question. For a long moment, the only sound was the steady hum of the ship and the rapid beeping of incoming alerts. Then, with a suddenness that made Ethan jump, the alien reached for a control, flipping a series of switches. "There is a place," the alien said, its voice barely above a whisper. "A nebula, dense with energy. They will not follow us there." Ethan's eyes widened. A nebula? The idea of flying into a swirling mass of cosmic gas and dust was terrifying, but it might be their only chance. "Will we survive it?" he asked, needing to hear the truth. The alien's pause was brief but telling. "Dangerous," it admitted. "But better than capture." Ethan nodded, steeling himself. They didn't have the luxury of choice. "Then let's go." The alien adjusted their course, the ship veering sharply as it changed direction. The stars outside blurred into streaks of light, the ship accelerating toward the nebula. Ethan could feel the tension in the air, a weight that pressed down on him as they neared their destination. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each one heavier than the last. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears, his eyes fixed on the viewport. In the distance, he could see the nebula, an immense, swirling cloud of purple and blue, crackling with energy. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a place that no sane pilot would dare to enter. But sanity wasn't a luxury they could afford. "We're close," the alien said, its voice calm but laced with urgency. "Hold on." Ethan braced himself as the ship plunged into the nebula. The cabin was instantly bathed in an eerie light, the view outside obscured by churning clouds of gas. The ship shuddered violently, the controls sparking as they struggled to maintain course. Ethan could feel the ship straining against the forces around it, the metal groaning as they pushed deeper into the storm. Shields holding? Ethan asked, his voice tight with fear. Barely, the alien replied, its focus entirely on the controls. We must keep moving. If we stop. Ethan didn't need to hear the rest. He could feel it. The ship was on the edge of collapse, barely holding together as they navigated through the nebula. They were flying blind, with no way to know what lay ahead. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the turbulence eased. The ship broke through the outer edges of the nebula, emerging into a pocket of calm. Ethan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, the tension in his muscles slowly unwinding. We made it, he murmured, disbelief tinging his voice. The alien nodded, though its expression remained serious. For now, yes. Ethan knew better than to feel relieved. They were still far from safe, and the reality of their situation loomed large. But for the moment, they had a reprieve, a chance to catch their breath and plan their next move. As the ship drifted through the calm space within the nebula, Ethan turned to the alien. What's our next move? How do we stop them from following us? The alien's gaze met his, a spark of determination in its eyes. We must find allies. Others who resist. Ethan nodded, understanding the gravity of the task ahead. Their journey was only beginning, and the challenges they would face were beyond anything he could have imagined. But he wasn't alone in this fight, and that knowledge gave him strength. Then let's find them, he said, resolve firming his voice. The alien inclined its head, a silent agreement passing between them. Together, they would face whatever came next. As the ship surged forward, Ethan couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. They had survived the impossible before, and they would do it again. Like, comment, subscribe, and share. I promise you, nothing will happen to your finger.